Excellent. Welcome to TADSummit online conference. We have for this week Daniel Gill, who has had some changes in office. So maybe Daniel, please introduce yourself and what's been going on with Augnet and its transition.
Yes, thank you, Alan. So at the back end of last year, we were pitching to a company with a view of them acquiring us. And whilst that didn't go to plan, one of the investors was there on the board and in that meeting. And through his family office, he has now acquired the intellectual property and enterprise accounts from Augnet. Put in some funding behind our R&D projects that we're deploying throughout this year.
Excellent. Congratulations. That's well done.
Augnet lives. all you AIT guys out there, watch out. He's still there.
Yeah. So the new, so the branding is changing as well. So the new entity as an SPV that was created to acquire Augnet's assets. That's been done under AOT.
AOT.
Yeah.
I like that.
Stands for
AOT.
Nothing in particular.
Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
So, given that acquisition of the accounts and the intellectual property, and I'm assuming you're part of that entity going forward, SPV being special purpose vehicle, where next? Because you've shown that the SMS industry doesn't really care that much about certification and governance. So what's the plan?
That was a bit of
I think they're caring now, though. I think it's changed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's been a bit of an awakening, sort of, for me. Leaving Microsoft 6 or 7 years ago, my starting assumption was that big corporates would care about governance and ensuring there's credibility and accountability throughout their supply chain. And back then, and I would argue up until quite recently, I was proved quite wrong. I do think, though, that the momentum of change or the direction of travel has changed. Mm-hmm. And I think because particularly fraud like AIT is now so commonly known about and discussed within the corporate and enterprise community, there now is a bit of a crescendo of change building. Certainly the momentum is there. There unfortunately is not much choice, though. If you're an enterprise today and you want to give your stakeholders, your management assurances that AIT is not possible in your supply chain, there's very limited scope to make those promises and keep them. Exactly. So we would like to see more people in this space. Might sound a bit counterintuitive because they by definition should be competitors to AOT, but at the moment it's really about being evangelical about AIT, and that there are now solutions to defend against it.
Exactly. Do you use what BT Group have been doing and Deutsche Telekom in trying to create a clean ecosystem as examples of what AOT can enable for an enterprise individually?
It's an interesting take. The issue, however, is for corporate compliance and corporate governance to exist, the corporate has to independently verify the supply chain. It's no point the suppliers saying, we're all good here, there's nothing to see. They have to act independently. And that remains to be remains the issue here.
Exactly, because with the carriers, they basically have a code. They have fines. So if you're pumping in any type of bad traffic, you get published. This is a bad actor here, or there's a problem on this particular supply chain, and then if you don't act, then the fines start.
I think I'm right in saying though, Alan, on what BT do in the UK, it's specifically focused on smishing and URL tracking rather than your AIT, because actually identifying the root cause of AIT is much more complex.
Well, so the claim is we have AI, we use AI, and things magically disappear.
Yeah, no, and as you've said before, quite rightly, BT have done a fantastic job in the UK of, to Daniel's point before about the fact that the industry is talking about this now. When they publish, even if they're in commercial confidence, but amongst their ecosystem of partners, they publish who is not behaving themselves or who is not performing or protecting themselves and their customers. Then I think you start to democratize, I guess, access to at least understanding more about the supply chain, and that's important.
And it's been good. We've seen Tim Biddle being published from Cinch on LinkedIn, again sharing stuff that once upon a time was never talked about.
Great work.
Exactly. Props to him.
Yeah, that was a great piece. So this is great. So look, you did a deal with a family office. So I know a lot about family offices. These people do serious diligence. They don't play around. So if you got an investment from a family office, they actually have to have a vision. I know they have a vision, because family office money is the hardest money to get. Full stop. If you're getting money from a family office, so they must have a really big vision here.
It's a tough one, because to call people out, there's got to be then a process of accountability, and the issue is that there's so few. Arguably, there are no metrics in the AIT space. It's a closed loop ecosystem. So if you pick on any one big brand, whether it's Amazon are particularly getting hard hit at the moment with AIT, but no one, I don't believe there is a single person who would be able to say to what extent are Amazon being hit, because you've got different AIT players in the ecosystem, each doing their own closed loop amount of AIT. They don't share data between each other. They don't know each other, probably. So there's, how do you surface data to say what the impact is? And the impact, by the way, I would argue is twofold. One is the artificial SMSs and therefore revenue that's being created, hence the original term, artificial inflated traffic. But there's a secondary aspect here as well, which is where those SMSs are being monitored for conversion. It puts the AIT fraudster in control of the routing algorithms, and it completely devalues whoever might be trying to do the routing analysis within Amazon and every other company. They've got there's so much false data that they're working with. It skews their routing decisions. So that if you can't surface the data to say the extent of this, it's very hard then to start holding people accountable, and and to what extent are they accountable for.
Exactly.
But everybody knows who's doing what. I mean, look, just so you know, this is kind of a great podcast for me, because I met you a long time ago. You reached out, you heard some stuff, and I met you. And I remember Doug Gardner was working with you in your last company. He's an old friend of mine from Twilio. And then I was talking to Kevin as well. Kevin was reaching out and yelling at me when I was saying stuff. I didn't know the guy. He's just like sending me messages like, "You're an idiot. This is wrong. That's wrong." And because he cared, but he was sick to his stomach participating in the industry. And now he's, fell upwards with an amazing company, Quantum Cavaro. And now that you've kind of fell forward yourself by having a family office as your partner, you're going to have an opportunity to really go forward. So for me, this is really a big celebration, watching both two guys here on this podcast fall upwards by having integrity and doing the right thing. So I think the moral of this podcast is, you know what? Nice guys sometimes finish first. And I'm really pleased, because I introduced both you guys to Alan. I just want to put that on the record that I brought two superstars in.
Alan's never forgiven you.
No, he loves you guys. Are you kidding me? Alan wants to be your marketing department with AIT. You should really consider, because he'll beat that thing to death. My standpoint is, look, it's happening. I mean, the good thing is you're going to be like fishing in a fishbowl because there's so much of it.
Yeah.
I mean, even what Google just did, and I'd like to get your take on that, Kevin. So your take on what Google just did. I was talking to Eddie DeCurtis last night, who's coming on the show Friday with his company Sushin. He really sharp guy. He knows a lot of stuff. What's your take on the move that Google just made? With really just killing SMS altogether. Is that as drastic as I'm hearing?
No, it's not. They're not killing SMS altogether. What they are doing is, as anyone I think who has to make decisions on this supply chain needs to do, is they're monitoring the conditions within the marketplaces that they work, and where their prices are heading north of 20-25 cents, and therefore AIT fraudsters are targeting those markets because of obviously the economic benefits to being successful in their endeavors. They have to come up with alternatives. They're also aware that the failings of the SS7 system, it kind of links to what we talked before about Tim's posts on LinkedIn, which is so informative on the signaling layer and on how important that is to understand this whole ecosystem. And so what Google are doing is saying, okay, we think in this particular marketplace, we don't have the right solution that financially actually works for our use cases, and they have a matrix of solutions. They talked recently in Barcelona at the event that I attended that the MEF ran, and Mobile Squared sponsored, and I think it was Richard Woolhouse who was speaking, said that they're looking at network APIs as an alternative in some instances, and that's probably good news for everyone who's involved in that business. But they're not going away from SMS. He didn't even mention, to be honest, QR codes, and I think we've already talked a little bit about QR codes, and without a doubt, in my mind, and it's just my opinion, but it's not a satisfactorily secure channel or medium to take away most of the use cases that I see on SMS. But there are obviously some that Google have cherry picked, and it might be linked to the value of the transaction as well. Exactly. Because you've got to remember, if there's a financial element to the transaction, then their responsibility is significantly higher. Also, their value per subscriber, it starts to be affected by what the decisions they make. Whereas if you're talking about simply just changing the customer care levels a little bit, then you can be a little bit, that's always been the case with the SMS world. And Daniel can attest to this. I mean, I first dealt with Daniel back in his days at Skype, pre-Microsoft, back, what we're talking, 15 years, Daniel, not far off.
Yeah, it would be.
And even then, people talked about the use cases that some of the emerging, as they were at the time, they're now, these digital natives that seem to run our world, but at the time they had different use cases and different scenarios where SMS would work for certain things. But marketing and what would be almost loosely termed as spam, in terms of chucking a load of SMS out there just to say that someone's commented on your board, whether it was a MySpace user or going back in those days. Do you need to send an SMS for that? Well, if there's no cost or very little cost, then you can send it. But if the cost is increasing, then you start to work through the value chain of how do we communicate with our customers? How much does it cost? How much are we willing to put into this bucket for this particular customer? And there's so many more elements to it. But it was a long-winded answer, as it usually is from me, Johnny. But
no, it's a great answer.
Google are not leaving SMS anytime soon.
It's not Google. It was Gmail and using QR code for a very specific application. And the reason that I tagged it is just their comments in terms of the global fraud that's taking place over SMS.
But let's be clear. Sorry, Daniel. Just to finish, but because then I'll stop talking and everyone else can. It's really important to understand Google see SMS being a major part of their communication solutions portfolio for quite some time yet, and that therefore means billions of messages in many territories around the world.
Yeah. I imagine there's probably three considerations that Google and similarly sized organizations will be looking at when they consider SMS versus other connectivity technologies. One is, of course, the cost. The second is the ability to govern the supply chain. Do we know what's going on? Are we are we at risk of exposing data to nefarious third-party suppliers? Do we know what our suppliers are doing and how they're acting? So cost, governance. And the third point is customer friction. If it's adding a level of effort to for the customer to engage with a platform, it's going to increase churn. And there's a balance between all these three things. And you might find, certainly I found this at Skype and Microsoft, that there is a dial that you can turn between those three, and that dial amends every quarter, I suppose, depending on how you perform last quarter. If costs are looking really, really good, perhaps we want to make it a bit more accessible to customers and lower that friction. When it goes too far, the governance might be out the window. So, there's no, in the SMS world, there is no perfect sort of, trifecta where they're all operating in harmony together. No. And other technologies, as they become more of a substitute option for SMS, depending where those dials are going to be pointing, that might make traffic migrate away from SMS. Perhaps one day it could start coming back.
I don't know. I mean, passkeys for me, it's a bit of a one-way street. When I'm basically logging onto something and I just touch the little sort of fingerprint detector, I don't need to remember anything. It just I'm in. Do I want to go back? Absolutely not. I have to remember entering in basically passwords. It's an utter pain. So I think some of them are. I think some of them could be because there are a range of alternatives. But where the like with Google, with the large vendors, because this again is the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago. With the large vendors, absolutely, you can make that investment in passkey across all your properties and user, customer base. But for most, businesses are small, medium, and that's a major investment to have around passkeys. So for them, we will see, the more obvious traditional methods continuing to be used for some time. So
there's one more thing I want to add, Alan. So one thing we were talking about with Daniel before the podcast here is an exploding market and something that I didn't think about, and where the family office, obviously, they know what they're doing. Yeah. And now I know a little bit about the spaces too, as being, involved with Wadero, is the explosion on IoT devices and the lack of security there, where you don't have the problem of these companies making money on IoT. You just have the actual defense of it. And Kevin, maybe this is a place where you can add in too. I don't know if you you heard that part, but kind of explain what you're doing with the IoT devices, because I think that's a huge market. I know it's a huge market, and billions and billions and tens of billions of devices. So how is Augnet being used or going to be used with IoT?
So with the Augnet intellectual property, AOT want to be offering that same technology to the IoT ecosystem. And what we've seen over the last sort of decade or so, as IoT has started to gain momentum, it's typically the larger companies using IoT for large machinery, turbines, and the expensive end of the equation. But it is becoming more accessible, and you're finding things like fire extinguishers and chair lifts, for the elderly and so on. Whereas 5 years ago, it was just too expensive to have an IoT ecosystem in that space. Whereas now, those sort of deployments are happening, but the security hasn't really kept up pace. And typically, the weakest part of any IoT deployment is the endpoints. So to have a device level security that encapsulates SIM card, eSIM, and the endpoint computing services, they're either very, very expensive or don't do a great job. And what we found is obviously mobile phones, that they're not, in contrast to a lot of the IoT deployments, mobile phones are relatively cheap devices, and yet security is more advanced on a mobile device than most of the IoT deployments. So we're in discussions with some distributors and IoT partners just to increase that security, to enable encryption, and in fact use SMS as a backup. There are a number of instances where IoT deployments don't have data connectivity, so they can't send out alerts or data back to a centralized platform. What we're able to do for the mission critical stuff or alerts is have that endpoint encrypt certain content and send it to an IoT platform, where the API, that platform then receives the SMS, but converts it into data that makes everyone else thinks it's just regular data.
Yeah.
So in essence, if about 5% of IoT data is not delivered back to platform, we're closing that gap quite substantially by using encrypted SMS as a failover, whilst adding a huge step forward in endpoint security.
Absolutely. And we're seeing it like in not just fire extinguishers, but fire detectors, fire doors, where they can have that, transmission. You don't want the fire alarm going off in a big building, when it's just because the door hasn't closed something. If you can basically signal it to security and have them come and fix that, it's far more appropriate for so many commercial properties.
Yeah, absolutely. What we are seeing now is a lot of momentum from businesses that 5 years ago found IoT a pretty scary topic for them to get involved with, whether it's from a technology standpoint or from a cost standpoint.
Yeah.
So things like caravans or RVs in the US, through to we've talked about the fire extinguishers and stair lifts and so on. But these traditionally are not a tech sophisticated advanced companies. No. They typically manufacture things, so to integrate IoT, what was scary for them now is something that is very accessible for them.
Exactly. Oh yeah. No, there's been over the past couple of years, I think it really has. Just again, it's time.
Kevin, you know a lot of these numbers, Kevin, what you're doing. I mean, the numbers are insane that I'm hearing on IoT devices and their projections in the next 5 years. I think it's a lot bigger than they're thinking.
Without a doubt. I mean, Daniel's obviously quite close to it at the moment, and I think it's really important to say that there are so many applications and so many industries that IoT lives in that most people don't even realize today.
Yeah.
So there are some really, really developed models that, if I go back 10 years to what JT was doing at that time, JT was providing the use of their own agreements and the data provisioning capabilities, and then a platform that was able to then support IoT aggregators in the same, almost in a similar model to SMS, but from an IoT perspective. The niche markets that were emerging back then, and like I'm talking about 10 years ago, were phenomenal. Now, what's interesting to me, and particularly with my Cavero perspective, is these are living, breathing networks in their own right, and they need to have the ability to almost self-provision. They need to have their own ability to trust propagate, for example. So to be able to actually provide anchors of trust within those networks, and that might not be for the stair lift scenario that as Stan was referring to. There might be a slightly more secure environment. Could be more manufacturing based or whatever, and they're looking at asset tracking or whatever, or the function of security within a major blue chips plant. But it's something that I don't know enough about at this stage. I'm exploring lots of opportunities with the people that we work with, and I definitely see it. Back to Daniel's point about we have to seek out those who are willing to put some money on the table now to demonstrate compliance. who aren't going to just take a risk, the ones who actually need to commit, who will commit to being compliant now, are going to be the winners in 3 or 4 years' time.
Yeah.
No longer, I think, can we run a telecoms ecosystem. And I'm looking at IoT now as somewhere where you can actually you don't have to go back 20 years to clean it up. You're only going back 5 or 10 years to clean it up. And so theoretically, that should be an easier job than a lot of the topics that we discuss when it comes to SMS and voice and so on and so forth. But the mandate for compliance on security, on identity, on protecting the customers of these of any of these services is there's going to be a big premium on it. And I think that's the reason why Daniel's had the interest from people who've really done their homework. They've done their due diligence, and I'm so pleased for Daniel, and I'd be excited about what that business can go forward and do. And in a similar way, from Cavera perspective, and you provided the narrative and the backdrop before, Johnny. I'm working in a slightly different area now, and we want to be the good guys here. We want to demonstrate that we can provide.
I mean, you guys are clearly the good guys.
Well, that's it, and we absolutely are. But what we've got to do, and my job as a kind of evangelist for our business, is to go out there and explain to the key decision makers, either in the communications ecosystem or in the enterprise space, that if you connect this and join the dots with the importance of identity, with protecting your customers, with where the world's heading now in terms of, and also where investment money exists, right? Investment money exists in a different, or with a different perspective to what we saw approaching COVID and post-COVID. There was a pylon around that time. That pylon no longer exists. Everyone's taking a watching brief, and the careful steps that I think Wall Street and the financiers are going to take now, they're only going to step in if you can demonstrate all the way through that you have something that is actually going to do some good in this world, rather than just pile on, give you a revenue drive for a year or two and then leave you with a hell of a lot of mess to clean up afterwards.
100%. And I got a name for you. So it's AOT, right?
It is, yep.
Alan ought to get a haircut.
Always, he'll find a way.
I don't agree. I'm going to be the voice of dissent there. I quite like it is, Alan. You keep rebelling against Johnny's conservatism.
Listen, old guys, as you get older, you get more conservative.
I don't know. It depends. But anyway, again, just to wrap it up, again, Daniel, congratulations. When you told me, when you gave me the message, I have to admit, it was with a sigh of relief that your solution will go on. And I think the family office is taking you in a very, insightful and hopefully a prosperous direction.
Yeah, the top cop is on the beat, man.
Yeah.
Your picture should be with a pile of money behind him with a family office going, "Hey guys, I'm coming back." Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And proof is going to be in the pudding. It's early days. Yeah. But it's a few times we've used that term today on this call, but this has got to be evangelical now. There's got to be a change in approach and belief from enterprise. I think I've said with you guys for the last few years now that the change in our industry is nearly always customer driven. The fact that customers haven't really been complaining about all this fraud that's been happening.
Well, they have.
Why change?
Look at Twitter. Look at Google. And what does the industry do?
No, but he means really complaining. And you know what? That's on you with marketing. And obviously, we're here to help you bang that message out. You got to call people out. It's like anything else. Yeah. You got to call them out. People have to be called out. You can't be in closed doors and meetings, as Kevin knows. And people are now calling it out more often. Yeah. Look, nobody wants to be dealing with bad guys doing bad things if people know that they're doing bad things. Because, look, show me who your friends are. I'll show you who you are. Yeah. And that's why TADSummit, we have you two guys on. And the kind of people that come on here. So I couldn't be happy.
And you're helping to get that message out there. There's a reason why these topics are being talked about more, and part of that is just a socialization process. Yes. The more contacts, the more people out there that you influence, that you talk to, whether they talk about this show on in public or whether or not they message you separately, the consciousness
You're kidding me?
of some of the issues that you've raised.
I just got off a call this morning. The CEO at Twilio blocked me. I can't tell you how many CEOs have blocked me. I can't even hashtag. It was kind of hilarious. But the truth is, people watch our content. If you go to Meth and you go to CPAS, you go to anybody, you'll see like 20 or 30 views on their sessions because they're all BS. They're not coming on there and saying things like we are here. So we have thousands of views, which in our industry might as well be millions. Like we did the one with Dara. We had 6,000 views watching the most boring podcast you've ever seen in your entire life. Who are these people watching it? They're people that are interested in, new solutions, whether it's Cavero, whether it's Augnet.
SIM boxes and all the rest.
I think what we're doing here is important, and we're going to keep doing it. And you two guys are pride and joy. Both you guys. You're climbing upwards, and the industry respects both you guys.
Absolutely. So again, thanks so much, guys.
Me not so much, but that's okay. I don't really
As I
care.
said, you're the mascot. Don't worry, Johnny.
I'm the mascot.
Someone's got a bit of fall guy, Johnny. You take one for
I'm
the
always
team.
the fall guy. Yeah, I don't care.